And like I said, you need to know that that startup configuration is a known good working stable configuration, because the second paragraph shows that, some coworker made a change and didn't follow the gospel according to packetlab, just went ahead, slapped something on and did a write and walked away. Now that startup config is worthless because it's going to be the same as the running config. So if you were to reload it, you're just going to be right back where you started from. And the crappy thing about that is that you can't really directly configure the startup configuration. You can do some things here, like I mentioned, that are a little convoluted. You can erase the startup configuration. That's a write erase command. Do not use that command unless you know what the fuck you're doing. Stay away from that command, because it will bring you pain and misery if you don't know what you're doing with that. But you can erase the startup configuration and it doesn't affect the running configuration. Again, the beauty of having two configurations. And then you can copy from an alternate source like a TFTP server, or if you save stuff to, maybe you have a flash card on the router, some other source, copy it into the startup configuration. And I mean, that's a topic for a different day, but there is a way to get around basically corrupted startup configurations. Well, it looks like this slide should have probably been before the other one, because here I'm saying, oh, look, hey, we got a feature that will allow you to replace, not merge, the running configuration with any valid full configuration from a variety of sources. TFTP server, in this case, we're going to be using startup configuration, and that is the configure replace command. Configure replace to the rescue. The configure replace command provides the capability to replace the current running configuration with any saved Cisco IOS configuration file, with the caveat that it must be a quote-unquote full configuration file. This functionality can be used to revert to a previous configuration state, effectively rolling back any configuration changes that were made since the previous configuration state was saved. And this slide kind of touches on stuff that we've already discussed. It's from another source, document source on Cisco's website. Basically, the replacement file must be a complete configuration generated by a Cisco IOS device. That's all we're going to use. I'm not going to go into a whole lot about what the difference is between a complete configuration. It does say if you do create it, say that you just want to whip it up in Notepad, as long as you follow the format of files generated by Cisco iOS devices, you're fine. It does give you a little bit more insight to what's going on. There's another set of videos that go through the archive config commands and that configuration rollback feature set. Configuration replace is actually bunched with that. There's a document out there called, I think it's configuration replace and configuration rollback. So it's part of that feature set technically. We'll see here when we'll use this command to show archive config differences when we're on the lab portion of this, but it applies the differences between the configurations and does not reapply already existing commands. So, technically it's not how I kind of described it, where it's like erase the entire running configuration and then stick the entire startup configuration in there, because, and this was that second bullet point that I mentioned earlier, you can see what the problem is there, is that you would have a brief outage, say that you deleted a frame relay map and then reapplied it. Anything that needed to converge or, could get potentially screwed up would do that. What it's doing is going through and saying, here's the differences, here's what I need to apply. I'm not going to mess with commands that are the same in the running and the startup configuration, and I'm not going to do a merge. And this command is designed to handle things like we discussed earlier with access lists. It'll do multiple passes, and we'll see that you can see what it's doing in each pass. There's an option to view that when you're applying this configuration, and it also has a limit, I think, of 5. Yeah, here it is. It says right, the limit of 5 passes. So generally, you're not going to need to have more than 3 passes, and there's a limit of 5 so that it doesn't get stuck in a loop where it's chasing its own tail and cannot get out of that loop. So you have very little potential to lock up the router when using this command. So this is what configure replace is going to look like on the CLI, and again, stick around for the lab videos and you'll see more than your fair share of this command. This first command here, there's a separate set of videos on configuration archive. I strongly suggest that you check them out. You don't have to have configuration archive configured on your router for this to work. I'm saying that, and I'm not 100% sure of that, because it could, as always, be dependent on your platform and or iOS version, but I'm fairly sure on this. At least if you're running 12.4 code for sure. I think 12.3 was when it came out, but I digress. Anyways, what this is saying is go ahead and show me the differences between the startup configuration and the running configuration. And it gives you this contextual configuration difference. Remember, in the Cisco documentation that we saw on the previous slide that this is how configure replace decides what commands it's going to replace. And in this case, I'm not going to get too deep into the details of this command. Like I said, check out that other set of videos. A plus in this case means it's going to be present in the running configuration. A minus means it's going to be the difference that is in the startup configuration. So you can see here our host name is router2, and we have that command obviously in the running configuration as hostname run router2. In the startup configuration, we're using the hostname R2. So when we roll this back, we will see that the hostname changes to R2. And we have a couple other trivial, well, the IP address I guess isn't trivial. We have a description, which is wimmy wham wham wuzzle, and that is a Slurms-McKenzie quote. And if you don't know who Slurms-McKenzie is, I fear for your soul. And then of course the IP address and SNMP string. Anywho, basically we're going to lean on this command quite a bit so that we can see changes before and after the configure replace. Okay, and here's the beast itself. So it's pretty easy. It's configure, replace, and this will throw you off a little bit maybe. You have to specify the source of the file. That can be a multitude of sources. We'll see that when we're on the CLI. It could be a TFTP server. In this case, it's going to be NVRAM. That's where the startup configuration lives. Just do a question mark when you get there and you will see the options. And we're going to be using startup config for most of the examples in this lesson, but you can use flash or, like I said, TFTP, blah, blah, blah. Let's get into this. So it gives you a little detail. It says this is what I'm going to do here. It says you're going to be replacing the current running configuration with the contents of the specified configuration file right here. It's putting the onus on you, which is assumed to be a complete configuration, not a partial configuration. Enter yes if you want to continue, and we have entered yes. This does have a little bit of cover your ass functionality built into it because, as I was mentioning up here, the NVRAM can be a little disconcerting. My dumbass did a configure replace flash startup earlier when I was messing with this, forgetting that that the startup configuration is actually in the NVRAM. And so it'll let you put in there. You can put flash, blah, 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 even if that file does not exist. What was cool was that it came up, and I don't know if we'll see this on the command line, but I'll just tell you here. It did come up with an additional question. It says, are you sure that you want to replace your running configuration with a file that has a size of 0? Basically, you bone this up, dude. Either the configuration has been erased or you're pointing to something completely wrong. And of course I was like, no, I must have messed something up, and I went back and there's my NVRAM. Also, it does at least one more check, and we might see this on the CLI depending how much changes are made. But I had one time at least where it came up with another prompt that I knew I'd specified the startup configuration, specified a valid file, but it said, do you want to replace your current running configuration with a file that is at least 50% smaller than your current running configuration? In that case, I did, but you can see it does have a little bit of cover your ass functionality built in here past this initial go ahead and hit yes and jump in. So after the command is issued, in this case we're just doing the defaults. There's other options you can list, and we'll see those later. It does a configuration lock. We'll discuss that a little bit later. Basically what it's doing is just saying, while I'm making this change, I'm locking out the configuration so you don't have somebody else in there changing it, because that would be a mess. Not a lot of commands, so it only took one pass. Remember, we said that it typically takes 3 or less and can take up to 5. After 5 it will not make any more passes, and it says, hey, we're done. Our rollback is done. So now you can use that command again to verify that it did what it said it was going to do, that it did roll this back, that it did a replacement. And we just issued this configuration differences command, and whereas we had all these differences before, booyah, nothing's different between the running and the startup configuration at this point.